reiterating this question around social differentiation, a concept and a methodology that remains so influential in agrarian political economy. I have the sense that there's a certain rigidity or a lethargy in our fieldwork practice of a number of research projects and PhD students going out to communities and attempting to establish and ascertain the degree of social differentiation through a series of methodological toolkits, asset indices, so on and so forth. And to an extent, this is stopping there. A lot of us being unable to reflect critically and more theoretically about the political and economic implications of this social differentiation that we see everywhere. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, I think I do. What I don't know is exactly how you, what it comes from and how you deal with it. Essentially, it's a problem of not having a question. So, when we were doing the work in the center, we got a lot of requests from various organizations to carry out their surveys. In other words, we had access to field work, so we would do the field work for there. And they were invariably these questionnaires that assumed a lot of differentiation that had to be worked out. Well, the question is, why? What research were you doing and for what reason? I can imagine research where that would be important, but I can imagine a lot of research where trying to document that will draw your attention away from what the dynamics actually are. What are the important class issues in this place? And, lots of the other stuff is incidental to people's, in fact, as Chinoff would say, it's incidental to people's life histories or whatever. Sometimes that's true. So I think it really can be extremely dangerous. The other thing that's difficult about it is that it's almost always assembled on the basis of interviews. And research becomes, doing all of these interviews that are quantitative, and then you have the statistical base for doing it. Whereas one of the strongest sources for me of a sense of problem is observation, which is much more difficult to manage with a questionnaire or a survey, and yet which is the source of insight about problems and processes. So it's more the weight that it, gives you, yeah? And it is, of course, I have a certain bias, which comes from my anthropological work. I mean, that is true. But I still think that it's extremely important to build that into your research. So longer-term research, residence in the place where you're studying, more use of existing surveys as your basis if you need to have a background that involves looking at quantitative material. Those things I think I do care about, yeah.
But you yourself have combined ethnography and survey.
Yeah, I think it's important to do it, yeah. I think it's important to do it. But I do think that the categories that when you read surveys that are done, what you're trying to do is to take from them categories that are relevant to the research question that you're asking. Yeah. So no, for Botswana, for example, when I did that thing on missing men, it was extremely important for me to look at the changing censuses over time. So I think that work is core, but I also think that it's important not to reduce qualitative research to just interviewing people about what they think and then noting down how many said this or not or whatever. So that's not the answer to the limitations of quantitative surveys. It's rather a repetition of some of the problems of quantitative surveys without the rigor that that they give you. And I think a lot of that works better if you have, well, it's stuff like when I was doing my field research in Chad, I woke up one morning to the sound of a woman walking up and down in the area between my house on the road and the house across. And so again, I got kind of freaked by, because she was talking about sorcery. And I thought, oh, you know, is this an accusation against me? And what it turned out to be about was that the man across the road the year before had used a lot of collective labor parties to cultivate his cotton, and then hadn't given the feast that was expected to be given to make his father, who had recently died, an ancestor. So that told me, that particular case told me something very important about how people viewed the limits of collective work, but also about this process of transition in which accumulation through production of cotton and inequalities being introduced through the production of cotton was a political issue there. Yeah. So that's, you know, observation.
And you didn't pick this up neither in an interview nor
No,
in an interview.
No.
Through
Well,
a question.
I did have to talk to people about what was going on, because I hadn't been there the year before. I was there for 2 years, but not for the year that they were talking about. And during that time, this person had become a real loner. I would have described him as a socially isolated, which was true. Yeah, I just didn't understand the
Lost
causes.
in transition.
Lost in transition. Yeah.
Bridget, it has been an absolute pleasure to engage with you today in this conversation, and you remain you have been and remained an important source of inspiration and ideas for a lot of young and early career scholars working on agrarian change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena.